Transforming your life with hypnotherapy just got easier with your host, Julie from CoachingHypnosis.net.
Welcome back, dear listener, to Coaching Hypnosis. Yesterday, we stepped into the blood-soaked carpets of the Russian Imperial Court to see how Grigory Rasputin weaponized somatic pacing and sensory fixation to control an empire. Today, we're boarding a flight and heading to the heart of Southeast Asia, land of the ultra-modern, clinical, hyper-regulated financial powerhouse, Singapore. We're looking at a case that exposes the absolute fascinating and terrifying paradox of the human subconscious. How a person living in a multi-million-dollar glass and steel penthouse can still have their critical thinking entirely hijacked by primeval generational fears. Today, we break down the clinical reality of black magic extortion rings of Singapore. Now, let's look at Singapore from a strategic executive perspective. It is one of the most technologically advanced, highly educated and legally strict societies on the face of the earth. We look at this gleaming monument to efficiency and tell ourselves that this is a place of pure logic, completely scrubbed of ancient superstitions. But underneath that ultra-slick corporate surface lies a deeply rooted cultural tapestry of ancestral traditions, spiritual boundaries, and a profound underlying fear of BOMOs or Bruder, practitioners of dark spiritual arts who can supposedly manifest catastrophic curses, illnesses, and ruin. The criminal networks operating these extortion rings aren't mystics, my friends. They don't possess ancient scroll spells. What they do have is an extraordinary understanding of cultural priming. They realize that if you know exactly which childhood ghost story a multimillionaire is still secretly terrified of, you can bypass their entire Western finance education in less than 30 minutes. Today, we decode the raw, neurolinguistic mechanics of how predators turn cultural schema into a weapon of total financial asset stripping. To understand how these extortion rings systematically bleed their targets dry, you have to understand the concept of a cultural schema. A schema is a pre-existing, deeply embedded mental framework that your brain uses to organize information. For many victims within these communities, the belief in spiritual retribution, generational curses, and black magic isn't a wacky fringe theory. It is a deeply ingrained subconscious software program running silently in the background since childhood. The extortion syndicate initiates a trap by profiling affluent older individuals who are navigating a period of acute vulnerability, perhaps a sudden medical diagnosis or a bitter family inheritance dispute. The operators introduce a spiritual master who claims to see an immense, suffocating darkness hovering over the victim's family line. They don't just state this, they stage an elaborate, high-sensory ritual ambush. The victim is brought into a dimly lit room, heavy with the smell of specific incenses, rhythmic chanting, and flickering candlelight. This is immediate sensory overload, designed to distort the analytical left hemisphere of the brain. Once the victim's nervous system is destabilized, the operator deploys a brutal, multi-stage hypnotic fear loop. Step 1. The cultural schema activation. Bring an anxious, affluent target into a high sensory ritual environment to awaken deeply embedded childhood fears of spiritual curses and bad luck. Step 2. Somatic attribution and panic driving. Use sleight of hand tricks to prove a curse, driving the nervous system into a high cortisol survival trance that completely blinds logical thought. Step 3. The asset stripping suggestion. Frame the victim's physical properties as the literal anchors of the curse, demanding a permanent legal transfer of deeds to cleanse the family line. The operator uses classic magic shop sleight of hand to create supernatural proof. They might have the victim crack open an egg, only for it to appear filled with blood, needles, or dark hair. To an unburdened mind, it's a cheap carnival trick. But to a nervous system already drowning in cortisol and culturally primed for spiritual panic, it functions as a profound somatic shock induction. The victim's critical faculty crashes instantly. They drop into an acute hyper-suggestible survival trance. Let's look at the absolute sarcastic absurdity of what these syndicates manage to pull off. You have seasoned real estate investors, people who spend their entire lives negotiating ruthless legal contracts and analysing market yields, who genuinely convince themselves that the most logical way to stop an invisible, ancient spirit from making their grandson sick is to sign a literal, legal binding deed transfer for a $3 million commercial shophouse over to a random stranger's shell company. It is the ultimate peak of predatory hypnotic engineering. The operator installs a rigid directive that the physical real estate agent is the literal anchor of the curse. The money and the land are dirty and must be transferred to the master's clean spiritual vessel to be neutralized. Under the crushing weight of this induced fear loop, the victim willingly walks into a legitimate law firm, sits in front of a completely oblivious notary, and signs away their life's work while locked in a waking hypnotic nightmare. As professional strategists and modern clinical hypnotists, we must look past the theoretical occult props to analyse the precise biological and linguistic levers these syndicates weaponized. They proved that if you can hijack a cultural fear, you can make an individual execute actions that directly ensure their own economic destruction. The amygdala hijack of the critical faculty. When the brain experiences acute existential terror, like the absolute certainty that your family is spiritually marked for death, the amygdala floods the prefrontal cortex with cortisol and adrenaline. The logical, analytical brain goes completely offline. The subconscious reverts to pure, primitive survival execution, making it completely compliant to any authority offering an escape route. The shock induction exploitation, the sleight of hand tricks, the bloody eggs, the appearing needles function exactly like a clinical shock induction by delivering an impossible, terrifying visual stimulus that the logical mind cannot immediately process. The operator creates an instantaneous physiological vacuum. The suggestion that follows, sign this transfer paper to save your family, is sucked directly into the subconscious without any critical filter. The weaponization of filial piety. These syndicates brilliantly exploit deeply held cultural values of family protection and respect by framing their financial surrender not as a personal loss, but as a heroic sacrifice to protect their children and grandchildren. They transform a humiliating robbery into an act of profound moral duty inside the victim's mind. The Singaporean authorities have cracked down heavily on these syndicates, handing down massive prison sentences for cheating, extortion, and coordinate criminal fraud. But these cases remain a stark warning to the modern corporate world. No matter how many degrees you hold or how sophisticated your financial portfolio is, your subconscious mind still carries the primal architecture of your upbringing. If it is farmed through fear, it can be manipulated into dismantling your entire material reality. The profound urgent lesson of the black magic extortion cases is a visceral reminder that true safety, clarity, and leadership can never be built on a foundation of induced terror, forced secrecy, or the surrender of your hard-earned sovereignty. Any guide, advisor, or system that seeks to control you by provoking your deepest, most irrational childhood fears or demanding your material assets to cure an internal vulnerability is running a deeply predatory script. An authentic mentor will always anchor you in your present logic, strengthen your personal boundaries, and return the ultimate authority directly to your own clear mind. True, unshakable composure is about integration, knowing how to recognize your old conditioned cultural scripts without letting them hijack your modern executive execution. If you've realized that you're navigating high-performance professional pressure by letting ancient, irrational fears run wild in the background, wasting your mental energy on unexamined imposter scripts, superstitious anxieties about sudden failure, or hiding your vulnerabilities because you're terrified of an unseen collapse, you're leaving your strategic mind wide open to exhaustion. It's time to step out of the fear loop and reclaim your sovereign logic. If you're ready to clear that cognitive noise, ground your execution in undeniable present reality, and lead your business with a completely unburdened, self-trusting mind, I invite you to book your free 40-minute clarity call. Together, we'll dismantle the conditioned noise, stabilize your nervous system, and install a powerful, unshakable subconscious identity focused entirely on your true present sovereign power. Remember, aligned subconscious plus healed history equals unshakable leadership. Thank you for listening. Align your mind. Visualize your future. Grow your business. Mindfully yours, Julie.